After studying this module, you shall be able to know the complex quantitative research designs, learn how to study the relationship between more than two variables, and evaluate the limitations and advantages of each design with respect to the phenomenon being studied. In the introductory module, Research Designs, that is, the module number 3, we have already discussed how vital a research design is to a research. However, in the module, only the simple experimental designs were the focus of exploration. The research designs considered in the previous module have been simple, focusing on a question about one variable or about a statistical relationship between two variables. But in many situations in social science research require complex experimental designs. The basic element of such designs have been discussed. What follows is how and why researchers combine these basic elements into more complex designs. They can have first the inclusion of multiple dependent variables and then the inclusion of multiple independent variables. For instance, Schnell, Haidt and Clore and Jordan in 2008 conducted an experiment to find out whether the feeling of physical disgust makes people harsher moral judgments. To achieve this, they manipulated participants' feeling of disgust by testing them in a clean room, messy room containing dirty utensils, overflowing dustbins and chewed up pen. A self-report questionnaire was used to measure the amount of attention people pay to their own bodily sensations, called the private body consciousness. The primary dependent variable, that is, the harshness of people's moral judgment, was measured by describing different behaviors like failing to return a found wallet on a scale of 1 to 7. Some other dependent measures were participants' willingness to eat at a new restaurant. Finally, the participants rated their current level of disgust and other emotions. Results found participants relatively high on private body consciousness to be experiencing more disgust and making harsher moral judgments than participants in a clean room. As a researcher, one can understand that designing such research is not a simple thought process, but it requires meticulous arrangement of variables and planning out the arrangements to test the number of hypotheses. With the number of variables involved in a research increasing, the research design also needs careful planning. Let us understand some of them and explore them in the preceding sections. The randomized block design. In this design, the principle of local control, as discussed earlier, is applied with the other two principles of experimental designs. The subjects are divided into groups called blocks such that within each group the subjects are relatively homogeneous in respect to some variable. The blocks are the levels at which the extraneous variable is held fixed so that its contribution to the total variability of the data can be measured. The variable used to group subjects is thought to be related to the measures to be obtained in respect to the dependent variable. The number of subjects in a given block would be equal to the number of treatments, and one subject in each block would be randomly assigned to each treatment. Each treatment appears the same number of times in each block. It is then analyzed using two-way ANOVA technique. For instance, consider the menu testing example mentioned in the previous module again with some modifications. A fast food franchise tests marketing 3 new menu items. To find out if they have the same popularity, 6 franchisee restaurants are randomly chosen. In accordance with the randomized block design, each restaurant will be tested marketing all 3 menu items. Furthermore, a restaurant will market only 1 menu item per week, and it takes 3 weeks to market all menu items. The testing order of the menu items for each restaurant is randomly assigned as well. You can have a look at the figure to understand the concept of randomized block design. We can find the restaurants being numbered in the columns and the menu items in the rows. The randomized block design is there. The Latin square design. Latin square designs are used to simultaneously control or eliminate 2 sources of nuisance variability. That is, variation can be controlled in 2 directions. This design is laid out in rows and columns, and each treatment occurs once in each row and each column. For instance, if there is a plot of land, the fertility of this land might change in both directions, north-south and east-west, due to soil or moisture gradient. So, both rows and columns can be used as blocking factors. By blocking the plot of land into columns and rows, each row is a level of the row factor and each column becomes the level of the column factor. The variation can be removed from the measured response in both directions if both rows and columns are considered as factors in our design. It is called the Latin square design because one can write it as a square with Latin letters to correspond to the treatments. The treatment factor levels are the Latin letters in this design. The number of rows and columns correspond to the number of treatment levels. So, if there are 4 treatments, then there are 4 rows and 4 columns, so as to create a Latin square. Thus, each of the treatments is in each row and each column. Look at the figure to understand the Latin square design. We can see that A, B, C, D and as a treatment for rows and columns are occurring in both the conditions. The design is very frequently used in agricultural research because conditions under which agricultural investigations are carried out differ from studies as nature plays an important role in agriculture. Of course, it is equally popular in social science researches also. For example, studying the effects of 5 different varieties of fertilizers on the yield of a specific crop, the varying fertility of the soil in different blocks in which the experiment has to be performed must be taken into account. Otherwise, the results might not be dependable, as the output will not just be affected by the fertilizer but also by the fertility of the soil or the varying seeds. Therefore, when there are 2 major extraneous factors like soil fertility and varying seeds, Latin square designs will be used. Similarly, in psychological research, whenever we want to study the effect of 2 treatment conditions or extraneous factors, then we may go for Latin square design. The design will be in the form such that each fertilizer appears 5 times but is used only once in each row and each column of the design. The treatments in this design are allocated among the plots such that no treatment occurs more than once in any row or any one column. The 2 blocking factors are represented through rows and columns. So, in the following diagram, there are 5 types of fertilizers A, B, C, D and E, and the 2 blocking factors of soil fertility and varying seeds. Have a look at the figure. There are 5 rows and 5 columns, and we find that the treatment conditions of A, B, C, D, E are present in all the rows and all the columns. The field as shown in the diagram gets divided into as many blocks as there are number of fertilizers, and each block is then divided into as many parts as there are varieties of fertilizers in a way such that each fertilizer is used in each block, whether column wise or row wise, only once. This design eliminates the differences in fertility gradient in the field in comparison to effect of different varieties of fertilizers on the yield of crop. But the limitation is that although each row and each column represents equally all fertilizer varieties, there still might be considerable differences in row and column. This means both up and across the field. It assumes no interaction between treatments and blocking factors. Also, it requires number of rows, columns and treatments to be equal. The factorial design. This design is used in experiments in which the effect of more than one factor are examined. It is useful in studying economic, social, educational and psychological phenomena where usually a large number of factors affect a particular dependent variable. For instance, looking at the variety of program variation in an educational program to see which works best. That is, we may have a variety of programs which stress on different concepts involved in education, and then we would like to see which different concept is more suitable to a particular educational program. In order to carry out such research, we will have the variety of program in the complete set of educational program and then see which one would turn out to be the best. That is, a number of programs are involved in the complete set of educational program. The sum of the concepts that can be tested can be the amount of time the children get instruction may be varied, with one group getting 1 hour instruction per week, another group may be getting 4 hour instruction per week. So, we are varying the concept of time with respect to the educational scheme. Also, we may change a few things other like also the setting may be varied, with one group getting instruction in the classroom and the other group being given instruction in a separate room. So, we have explored two concepts here. One is the time factor and other is the setup where we are testing the educational program. Thinking about having 4 separate groups, but when the amount of instruction time is varied, what setting would be used in class or separate room, and then what would be the instruction time to use with the different kind of setups where education has to be imparted. With factorial designs, we can study both ways, as both ways can be had by crossing our 2 time in instruction conditions with each of our 2 settings. That means each of the 2 settings would have both the time conditions, and then both the time conditions would also have the 2 different setups where education would be imparted. Let us have a look at the figure. Now, what we can see is group 1 is given 1 hour per week of the class in classroom itself, whereas the group 2 is given 1 hour per week of time in instruction, but that setting is outside the classroom or pull out, as we have written it here in the diagram. The group 3 on the other hand is varying in class and 4 hours per week, and the group 4 is given 4 hours of instructions time per week, whereas the setting of the class is somewhere outside the classroom. So, we can explore both the factors, that is the time factor as well as the setting factor, and 4 groups can be made. This is the factorial design. In factorial design, the dependent variables are called factors. In this example, factors are instruction time and settings. The level becomes the subdivision of factor. In the example, the instruction time having 2 levels and even the setting having 2 levels. So, it can be represented as 2 into 2 factorial design. But if imagine the setup, that is the setting had more than 2 levels, that is inside the classroom, inside the laboratory or outside the laboratory in open setup, then it would have 3 levels. The design would have then be called 2 into 3 factorial design, because the time factor still has only 2 levels, so represented by 2, whereas the setup has 3 levels now and we call it as 2 into 3 factorial design. The number tells how many factors are there and the values tell how many levels are there. Similarly, a 3 into 4 factorial design will have 2 factors with 3 and 4 levels in each factor respectively. If the number of factors increase, then it would have been, see, if there were 3 factors involved, that is we have time, setting and another third factor, maybe like you can say the language, then it would have been A, B and C, and the number of levels of language, that is the languages involved, we may have English, Hindi, Sanskrit, Marathi, 4 levels of language, then the design could have been called 2 into 3 into 4 factorial design. 2 for the time factor, right, 3 for the setup, that is inside the classroom, inside the laboratory and outside in the open, right, and then the third factor represented by 4 represents the 4 levels of the languages that we just discussed. So, we find that a 3 into 4 factorial design will have 2 factors with 3 and 4 levels in each factor respectively. Consider one more example. An example where 3 factors are there with one experimental variable having 2 treatment and 2 control variables, each one of which has 2 levels. So, such a design would be represented as 2 into 2 into 2 complex factorial design containing a total of 8 cells. Look at the figure. You can find that there are different levels and control variables of the different factors involved. This is the complex factorial design where there are one level, there will be 2 cells. With number of levels increasing, we will find that the number of cells also increase in number. With the help of this design, one can determine the main effects of 3 variables, that is 1 experimental and 2 control variables. The interactions between each possible pair of variables called the first order interactions and the variables taken in triplets called second order interactions. To determine the main effect for the experimental variable, the researcher must compare the combined mean of data in cells 1, 2, 3 and 4 for treatment A with the combined mean of data in cells 5, 6, 7 and 8 for treatment B. In this way, the main effect for experimental variable, that is independent of control variable 1 and variable 2, is obtained. Similarly, for the main effect of control variable 1 independent of experimental variable and control variable 2 is obtained if we compare the combined mean of data in cells 1, 3, 5 and 7 with the combined mean of data in cells 2, 4, 6 and 8 of the 2 into 2 factorial design. In the same way, the main effect for control variable 2 independent of experimental variable and control variable 1 can be determined if the combined mean of data in cells 1, 2, 5 and 6 are compared with combined mean of data in cells 3, 4, 7 and 8. Complex factorial designs can be generalized to any number of combinations of experimental and control independent variables. Greater the number of independent variables included in a complex factorial design, higher the order of interactional analysis is possible, as we shall see in the modules of this paper at later stages. The factorial designs are useful as they provide equivalent accuracy with less efforts and are economical also. With their help, one can determine the main effects of two or more factors in one single experiment, permitting different other comparisons of interest. So, you have number of factors with different levels being tested in one experiment only, and we can combine their effects as per our experimental demands by choosing and picking up the relevant cells where the interactions are involved and taking their data to suit our hypothetical requirements. The correlational designs. The correlational research tests for statistical relationship between variables, wherein a researcher begins with the idea that there might be a relationship between two variables. Both the variables are measured on a large number of cases, and to check if they are actually related, we may follow these designs. For instance, a health psychologist might be interested in testing whether people with more number of friends tend to be healthier or not. By surveying a group of 500 people in her community and asking them the number of friends they have, and then getting a measure of their overall health, she finds a positive correlation between these variables, implying a moderate tendency for people with more friends to be more healthier. The variables are simply measured without manipulation, and the data is analyzed to see whether the variables are related or not. The statistical tools measure strength and direction of relationship, that is, the correlation coefficients. However, in correlational studies, the cause and effect relationship cannot be determined. A correlational study can be performed when some independent variables cannot be manipulated, like gender, age, personality types, ethnic background, height, etc. Or this design may be used when some independent variables would be unethical to manipulate, like studying the effect of smoking on cancer rates or the effects of brain damage on different areas of brain on speech production. Thus, levels of independent variables may be examined as they already exist in the population. The correlational research designs determine the extent to which two factors are related and not the extent to which one factor may cause change in the other factor. The correlational designs may be explanatory or prediction based in nature. The explanatory designs. To explore the extent to which two or more variables covary, or when changes in one variable are reflected on the other, the data in such studies is collected at one time as their focus is not based on future or past performance of participants. During analysis, researchers analyze participants as a single group instead of creating subcategories of participants. Two scores are collected from each participant, with each score representing each variable being studied. Prediction designs. It is used by researchers when purpose of study is to predict certain outcomes in one variable from another variable that serves as the predictor. The predictor variable is used to forecast, and the criterion variable is used as the anticipated outcome that is being predicted. Such studies include forecast of anticipated future performance and advanced statistical procedures, including multiple regression, as we shall study in coming modules. The limitations of a correlational design include inability to infer a causal relationship between the variables, outliers or a score that falls substantially above or below most of the other scores can alter the direction and strength of observed correlation, obscuring the relationship between two factors, and one also needs to avoid making conclusions about relationships that fall beyond the range of data measured. The social research requires a design or a structure before data collection or analysis can start. The function of a research design is to ensure that the evidence obtained enables us to answer the initial questions as unambiguously as possible. Research design hence deals with a logical problem and not a logistical problem, which may vary depending on the type of topic being studied. So, one can imagine the importance that a research design carries in research area. Before one proceed with a research, it is perhaps like a blueprint to the kind of research you have, because if you don't have the right research design to suit your needs, then you won't have the right answers also to the problem that you are trying to explore in your research. Summary. Social research requires a design or a structure before data collection or analysis can start. The function of a research design is to ensure that the evidence obtained enables us to answer the initial question as unambiguously as possible. The research design hence deal with a logical problem and not a logistical problem, which may vary depending on the type of topic being studied. One can understand as a social scientist that designing such research is not a simple thought process, but requires meticulous arrangement of variables and planning out the arrangements to test the hypothesis. With the number of variables involved in a research increasing, the research designs also need careful planning. Latin square designs are designs used to simultaneously control or eliminate two sources of nuisance variability, that is, the variation can be controlled in two directions. This design is laid out in rows and columns, and each treatment occurs once in each row and each column. The factorial designs. These designs are used in experiments where the effects of varying more than one factor are to be determined. It is useful in economic and social phenomena where usually a large number of factors affect a particular problem. Factorial designs may be simple factorial design and complex factorial designs. The correlational research designs test for statistical relationships between variables, wherein the researcher begins with the idea that there might be a relationship between two variables. Both the variables are measured on a large number of cases and to check if they are actually related. Correlational designs may be explanatory or prediction based in nature.